Hey everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, back again. It's still bitterly cold in the northeast. I'm still very frozen, but I'm gonna let it go because we have some big wrestling news today. I'm terribly sorry about that. Two major independent wrestling stars have been offered contracts by WWE, according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Elsewhere as well, we're going to talk about Brock Lesnar and that whole situation. Will he abandon WWE ahead of WrestleMania and go back to the UFC, or will he stick around and face Roman Reigns in New Orleans? Let's get right into it and let's take a look at all of the lovely news. First of all, yes, two major wrestling stars of the independent scene have been offered contracts by WWE, according to Big Bloody Dave Meltzer, and they are Keith Lee and Big Daddy Walter, two men that I've mentioned previously on Wrestlers of the Week, and two of the biggest independent stars around today, I think it's very fair to say. Keith Lee, if you haven't seen him, is a massive guy, but also very agile indeed. He wrestles for promotions like Evolve. He's also spent quite a lot of time over in the UK, wrestling for promotions, like Progress and Defiant and Rev Pro, I think, as well. Quite a few. He's a very well-travelled wrestler and very popular indeed. PWG was the other North American promotion I was thinking of. Walter, on the other hand, is an Austrian guy who's based in Germany for WXW, but has also done the rounds in places like, again, Progress and other big indie promotions around the world. He's also a towering big guy, but his game is less about agility than Keith Lee. His is more just about big, meaty chops, horrible big power moves, and he's just very terrifying and legitimate to watch. Maybe this is part of WWE trying to bring in big, believable guys again. But don't worry, this isn't a return to like the days of the Great Khali and big immobile guys who can't wrestle really. These are two of the best wrestlers in the world, I think it's fair to say. Now, word on the street, or word in the newsletter, is that Keith Lee is going to accept the contract, it seems, purely because he's been turning down dates, reportedly, around the time that he will be expected to start. Both men, I should mention, are expected to start in May in Orlando, in the Performance Center, should they choose to sign those contracts. Walter, on the other hand, is much less of a certainty. Apparently, he's very happy with life in WXW. He also runs a training school, and apparently, he's just not convinced whether that big change in lifestyle is really for him. Fair enough. I mean, you've got to respect both guys' decisions if they do indeed take those decisions as reported online. Now, personally, I would love to see both of these guys in WWE, but again, I can respect that maybe they'll want to stay on the independent scene. But Keith Lee in particular really does have star potential, in my opinion. Not only is he gargantuan, he's also very agile, very charismatic as well. He's always telling people to bask in his glory. Walter, there'd be a few limitations. Obviously, English isn't his native language. But again, he's sort of an Andre the Giant figure. Obviously, a little bit smaller than Andre the Giant. But one of those people who has a certain charisma, even if they're not the most eloquent, purely because of their presence and their menacing, scary factor. More on those stories as they develop, of course. We'll see whether they do indeed sign those contracts or whether they decide to remain on the independent scene. But now it's time to talk about one of the biggest stars in the entire world of wrestling, Brock Lesnar, and whether he'll return to the UFC. Now, Dana White recently appeared on a radio show. I think it was a NASCAR driver's radio show. I've forgotten the NASCAR driver's name, but it's out there if you Google it. And he said that he's very confident that Brock Lesnar will return to the UFC. Now, some news sources online, maybe some less reputable news, some news sources online have kind of jumped the gun a little bit and said, you know, this means that Brock Lesnar's going to leave WWE. What's going to happen with WrestleMania? Their main event's going to be ruined. I don't quite see it that way, and I'll tell you why. Now, there's been a lot of drama this week on Monday Night Raw surrounding this whole, is it a work, is it a shoot, is it a work shoot, about Brock Lesnar not turning up and Roman Reigns having to cut a promo where he said, I'm a wrestling guy, Lesnar is not, he just cares about money, in an attempt to get Roman Reigns cheered and Brock Lesnar booed. And it worked temporarily. Reigns did get cheered after that promo. But there are reports circulating that seem to suggest that this was actually a work and that Lesnar deliberately didn't show up and that, you know, this was all part of WWE's plan. And it kind of does make sense. I should mention that Lesnar is not booked for next week's Raw, but apparently is booked for the one following that. Now, news, according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter again, from Lesnar's camp is that they want him to go back to UFC because UFC is generally bigger than pro wrestling is right now, and also because even though it's big and, you know, it's the primary MMA promotion and MMA is such a big phenomenon these days, they are kind of lacking in top stars. Ronda Rousey, of course, she lost a couple of fights and then now is in WWE. Conor McGregor went into boxing and he hasn't yet fought again in UFC. They're in need of big stars, and especially big heavyweight stars. stars. Obviously, Lesnar is a heavyweight. He's a former UFC heavyweight champion. The big money match would be Lesnar versus Jon Jones, but Jon Jones is going through his own suspension issues. He's got a hearing apparently to do with a failed drugs test. But other potential fights for Lesnar include Cain Velasquez, who I think he's lost to previously, Stipe Miocic. The money match would be against Jon Jones. That just looks very unlikely given both men's problem with failed drug tests in the past. So in conclusion, I reckon that Lesnar's going to stick around until WrestleMania, wrestle Roman Reigns, lose, and then head off back to the UFC. That's just my opinion, but I feel pretty confident in predicting that that's going to happen, weighing up all the evidence that we've seen over the past week or so. WWE, though, aren't being careless. They have Braun Strowman apparently in reserve in a very special booking position where he's kind of floating around, and his WrestleMania match will be decided closer to the time if something should happen with Lesnar or if something should happen with Reigns. Remember, there's that whole potential kind of drug scandal where he's allegedly been purchasing drugs steroids a year ago from that jailed gym owner. But should that not happen, and should Lesnar stay as well, it seems like that Strowman will have a different opponent instead. So they've kept him as kind of a free agent sort of position almost in terms of the build-up to WrestleMania. Thank you very much for watching this video. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. You can follow me on Twitter at JackTheJobber. You can follow all of us at Cultaholic, and do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, if you enjoy what we do. There are some rewards and all the rest of it. And never forget, of course, to join us.